Thank you, Don, and good afternoon, everybody. So it's a great pleasure to be here at the University of Maryland with colleagues from the University of Delaware, and it's fun to be the business guy in the academic setting, knowing that your product is what we use, and it's what you create that creates the platform for the future. What I want to do in a short time, given to each of us before questions, is I just want to skip across a couple themes that I think will draw from what you've been talking about this morning, but I hope in a practical way and to give you some insights on how to drive forward. I want to tell you a little bit about Constellation first, just so you know where I'm coming from. And then I'm going to talk about sustainability and climate change, and what does that actually mean when you put the two side by side. A little bit about, we've heard about disruptive climate change. I want to talk about disruptive institutions, technology, and policy, and then the idea of integration into curricula. So, Constellation first. Constellation Energy, we're the largest competitive supplier of electricity and gas in America. 90,000 commercial industrial customers, on our way to 1 million residential customers in a competitive, innovative environment. We're about to merge with another company called Exelon, which will make us the biggest generator of power in America, too. In the first quarter of next year, when we merge with Exelon, our company in 2012 will exceed President Obama's clean energy goal for 2035 without inventing a single new technology. So I want to just hit you with that point right at the outset as we talk about climate change and the solution for climate change. My central thesis on climate change, I've been studying this and I've been working on it for 20 years. You can get from here to there without inventing a single new technology. It's all about human organization. It's about politics, it's about policy, it's about institutions, it's about how you're organizing your economic affairs. You can choose to get to a much cleaner state. It just requires a level of organization and an orientation that we're not comfortable with. My son recently sent me a quote from Isaac Newton. The quote was, "Life is joy, death is peace. It's change that's difficult." And that's really what this conversation's about. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this then in context. It has to do with the issue of sustainability and climate change. Remember, for about 20 years, it was all about sustainability. And you think about Rio back in 1992, right? And we're about to celebrate Rio plus 20. We had the Johannesburg World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002, which I was actually a lead party in. We have a conflict between sustainability and climate change, and the conflict is just who's the chief. When you think about the developing world, the emerging economies, they are clearly about sustainability and actually don't care very much about climate change, except for the small number of small island states who care a lot about climate change. But the reality of the international discussion, most of the world is still focused on the concept of sustainability. Climate change comes along for the ride. In the developed world, where we've made huge strides on sustainability, although not nearly as far as we need to go, in the developed world, it has become our luxury to focus on climate change. So one of the essential questions this convocation has to ask itself is, how do we orient that? And I see my favorite part of the declaration, the statement that's coming out, is the sentence that says, all college students should be exposed to climate change in the broader context of sustainability during their undergraduate experience. Well, this is a wonderfully academic statement in that, which is first? Is it sustainability and then climate change is a piece of the discussion? Or is it climate change and there's a broader context to understand with sustainability? There's a priority issue that has to be confronted. Now, I'll tell you my bias. My bias is straightforward. It's about sustainability, and climate change and addressing and confronting the serious consequences of climate change is an essential aspect of that. But it is only when you consider air pollution, water pollution, material sciences, the ecosystem effects, it's only when you look at them as a holistically in the context of sustainability, and then you understand both the near-term and long-term consequences of global greenhouse gases, that you begin to orient your students, your faculty, and your political and your economic and other enterprises. You're beginning to orient it in a conversation that makes sense. It links together. The other thing is there's great power in ride-along. When I was dealing with China, I remember my first years going to China back in 2001. They wouldn't even mention climate change. It wasn't on their agenda. But when you wanted to talk to them about energy security, and you wanted to talk to them about the devastating impacts of their just horrific air pollution, well, that was a conversation the premier wanted to have. Well, there's a lot that can be said in that conversation that's also going to dramatically cut your greenhouse gases. But I think this is an essential issue. We've got to think about, is it sustainability or climate change? I would also note that for 8 years of G8s that I participated in, climate change dominated the G8 leadership. And that was important and good, but sustainability took a back seat. The rest of the developing world was saying, we want help with water, we want help with our energy, we want help with our agricultural systems and our healthcare systems. We need you. Most of the focus was on industrialized country greenhouse gas emissions. So we sort of lost 8 years of conversation at a leadership level. And I think that's a mistake. So I hope when you come out of this conference, the priority for the universities and the idea of educating on climate change is we are educating on sustainability, and climate change is an essential component of that understanding and that action. So what about action? What about action? Well, I actually think climate change is not complicated. Many people think it is. I think it's not complicated, since a big chunk of the problem is using fossil fuels to make power. Well, I don't have to invent a single new technology to make all the power the world needs without a lot of greenhouse gases. But you have to include nuclear. So I think climate change in the power generation issue is a very simple equation. Can you and will you include a lot more nuclear or not? If your choice is not, then we've got a big challenge. Okay? Then we've got a big challenge. I like going the easy route. You need it all. You need natural gas, wind, solar, all of that. You need it all, but if you can get a lot more nuclear power, I've addressed a big piece of the equation. The same is true when it comes to cars, vehicles. That's the other big piece of the equation. It's predominantly fossil fuel based. The power sector showed after the fuel shocks of the 1970s that we could fully wean ourselves off of oil. You may forget, but 40 years ago we were heavily dependent on oil for making power, and we substituted it with everything else. Well, the same can occur with vehicles. It's just you have to decide that you're going to reorient your capital investment toward these alternatives. And we've got plenty. We have efficiency, we have biofuels, we have electricity. We've got a wide range of transportation options, which can then draw from cleaner sources and can substantially displace the fossil fuels in the transportation mix. We just have to decide to develop them and go after them. Do they cost money? Yes. Are we about to spend trillions of dollars on new power systems and new transportation systems? Yes. So let's orient that spend toward the cleaner outcomes. And then that just leaves agriculture. So agriculture is 20% of the international problem. I don't have to invent anything new because we are producing more food on less land in the developed world using technologies and practices that are wholly available in the developing world. So there's nothing new to be invented when it comes to agricultural productivity and getting to a very low or zero greenhouse gas equation. It's political processes, it's business processes, it's economics and education that drive that. And then the other 10% is industrial activities, and we're doing everything we can with our customers to get their footprint smaller. So I actually don't think this is complicated. It's a matter of will and reorganization, which takes me, how do we get disruptive institutions, technology, and policy? Our institutions are built on what is, not on what can be. When I was in government, every university I visited during the 2000s was pretty pleased to show off their new environmental center. And everyone has them now. Everyone has their new environmental center. And I would react to this with great dismay. I'd say, no, that's too late. That's so 70s to have your new environmental center. Because what we need is we need sustainability. We need environmentalism. We need natural resource conservation. We need climate change embedded in the core curricula of every one of your activities. So if your business school has 5 case studies that have an environmental message and theme that every business student has to go through, that's what I want. If your law school contracts course has a whole section on due diligence in your transaction about the environmental impacts of a merger, well, that's what you want. If your engineering school is trying to figure out how to create it, we were just talking about this at lunch, how to create a new system of highways that is more adaptable and more functional in the wake of lots of disruptive events, those are the kinds of activities we should be assigning our students. So I would rather have seen in the president's office, the division of sustainability and curricula, how to drive just these core elements into each of the components. And to that I would add poetry. It's very funny, I won a national award for reciting poetry, and one of my poems is a Carl Sandburg poem. Carl Sandburg was the great poet talking about the industrialization of America, right? There was so much evocative in his poetry. Where's the modern poetry around this issue of sustainability, better human welfare, better integration and coordination of social functions? So I think there's a great opportunity with full integration. And I hope you can all take those environmental centers and plow them into curricula across the board, because I think that's where the action's going to be. Which then brings me to conclude, which is really so much about climate change is doom and gloom. I personally thought it was a huge failing of Al Gore's film. It was an important film. But when 99% of it is about how awful things are and 1% is about what you might do about it, that's just not terribly inspiring. We are a nation in particular that loves to know that solutions are within our grasp, and then we exceed expectations. And so I think a solutions-oriented focus to climate change is essential. And even to this day, it is still problem-focused, not solution-focused. In addition, it needs to be tethered to the human condition. You will always find people that care about polar bears. I'm one of them. You will always find people that care about the poor in low-lying areas in Bangladesh, and I am one of them. But most people don't focus on that. So you really have to bring climate change and sustainability back to the ongoing human welfare equation and bring it to people in their homes, in their lives where they live. And you bring it to them not in what they need to give up, but in what they are capable of achieving. That's how you bring it to them. And that's what we're trying to do on the business side. Every day, trying to sell sustainable solutions to business customers and residential customers. And I got to tell you, it's a fun conversation to have, and there's increasing acceptance of it. So I am an optimist in this area, not a pessimist, and I look forward to the rest of the dialogue.